I thought to myself, I wonder where it can be. I rolled the garbage bin out to the curb. Channel 8 News reports a rabid dog that killed 10 people in a suburban neighborhood of Lexington, Florida. The victims were taking out their garbage at night, and there were no witnesses. I thought to myself, how do they know it's a dog if there are no witnesses? We decided to go and investigate. Tracy found an Airbnb, and it was a house where a couple of the incidents happened just a few days ago. We arrived at the scene. It was still daylight. Tracy and Chris went inside the house. I walked over to where they kept the garbage bin outside. I noticed black goo on the bin. I retrieved a sample. Then I went into the house. Tracy and Chris are sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for the sun to go down. Tracy is studying spells from the Book of the Sleepers. Chris has bags and bags of food that he's eating. I asked Chris, how much food are you going to eat? Chris said, don't worry, I'm going to leave some so we have some garbage to take out. Chris burps. We laughed. Tracy said, you're a pig. Chris chuckled. Tracy said, Stanley, what time is sunset? I said, 8:30. It's 8:15 now. A dog started barking in the background. Chris said, we might be here for nothing. It could just be a dog. I said, yeah, a dog that killed 10 people and no witnesses. It also left some sort of black goo on the garbage bin. Tracy said, black goo? What black goo? I said, yeah, I found this gooey substance a few minutes ago. I'm going to the mobile lab to test it. Tracy asked Chris, do you really think it's a dog? Chris said, no, I was joking. But really, he believes it's a dog. He just didn't want to seem not so smart when the lab test came back. I made it back. Chris asked, Stanley, what are the test results? I said, let me ask Claire. It should be finished by now. I asked Claire, Claire, do you have the test results? Claire said,
yes, the lab test couldn't identify the sample's origin. The sample consists of a toxin that can paralyze you if it gets on you. It also consists of 10% frog DNA, 40% human, and 50% is unidentifiable.
The sun finally went down. A dog started barking again. Tracy and I looked at Chris. Chris smiled. And Tracy and I looked at each other. I told Chris, since it's a dog, go ahead and take out the garbage. Chris said, okay. He gathered all the garbage. Then Chris took it out. While heading towards the garbage bin outside, he was met face to face with a mean-looking dog. Chris screamed, dropped the garbage, and ran up and down the street screaming while the dog was chasing him. Then he made it into the house before the dog could bite him. Chris walked into the kitchen where we were. Chris was out of breath. Tracy asked, Chris, what happened? Chris said, that darn dog chased me. Tracy asked, Chris, are you okay? Chris said, yeah, I'm all right. I said, I'll call the animal control to get the dog. Chris said, Tracy, I told you it was a dog killing people. Tracy said to Chris, I thought you said you were joking. Chris said, well, I wasn't. Tracy said, yeah, right. I said, animal control will be here in a couple of minutes. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. I turned on the speakerphone and I said, hello? Hello, this is animal control. We want to thank you for your help. We caught the dog. I said, no problem. Animal control said, have a nice day. I said, I'll finish taking out the garbage. I picked up the garbage and cautiously walked over towards the garbage bin while looking around. Then placed it in the bin. I thought to myself, I wonder where it can be. I rolled the garbage bin out to the curb. Something jumped out the garbage bin. I ran towards the house. It spits the black goo at me, but it missed. I made it into the house and closed the door. I went into the kitchen. I told Tracy and Chris, I seen it. Chris said, you did? Like he couldn't believe it. I need to tell Claire its description so she can search the Gray District Agency database for it. I said, Claire, I need you to search the database for a creature 4 feet tall, stands on 2 legs, is green, very aggressive, hides in garbage bins, and spits the black goo you scanned earlier. Claire said,
I found something that matches your description. It's called a frogman. It spits a paralyzing venom, and its saliva is similar to a Komodo dragon's. It has a devastating effect on prey, causing a sudden drop in blood pressure that sends them into shock. At the same time, the venom stops the victim's blood from clotting, so it bleeds to death. I advise you to not get bitten or let it spit on you. It's not attracted to the garbage, but it's clever. It has learned when you're going to take out the garbage and waits to ambush you. Also, there is no known weapon to catch it alive, and there may be information about the frogman that we do not know.
I said, this thing is fast, but it looks clumsy. Tracy said, Stanley, we should just lock it in the garbage bin. I said, that's a good idea. We will wait till Wednesday night when everyone takes out their garbage for pickup on Thursday morning. Wednesday night. I said, okay, it's that time. Let's go out here and catch this thing. I said, Chris, grab the garbage. We walked over to the garbage bin, and I rolled the bin to the curb. Then Chris tossed the garbage in the garbage bin and locked it. The garbage bin started shaking, and we could hear the frogman growling and clawing, trying to get out. Tracy said that was our easiest catch ever. It got out. Its venom melted a hole in the side of the bin. It took off running the opposite direction. I said, it will probably show up in another neighborhood now. It's too intelligent to come back here, knowing we're trying to catch it. Tracy said, wow, we actually couldn't catch it. I said, yeah, for now. We were listening to the Gray District Agency World Emergency Scanner. There were multiple attacks where the victims were drained of their blood, and their eyes were missing. The bodies were always found underneath heavily dense trees in local neighborhoods and wooded areas. Apparently, the incident always happens at night, and there are no witnesses. I told Claire, our Gray District Agency AI, about the evidence we heard from the World Emergency Scanner, so she could help figure out what attacked the people. And Claire said,
it was a tree gimp. They were first seen in the 1600s. They only hunt from trees at night and burrow themselves in the ground during the day. They live and hunt with their mate. One will intentionally distract you with a clicking sound and let you see it, while the other will attack you from the side or rear. They can jump up to 100 feet, lift a ton, and run up to 60 miles per hour. You can catch it alive with a magical witch spell from the Book of the Sleepers. It neutralizes them, keeping them frozen in time until they are released from the spell.
Tracy, Chris, and I looked at each other, and I said, Tracy, you perform the spell. Chris and I will protect you. Tracy and Chris looked worried. We went to the last place the bodies were found. We arrived at the location at night. There is an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. The house has large, thick trees all around it. We heard noises coming from everywhere. We had our flashlights out and started walking around to look for clues. Tracy screams. The bushes next to Tracy shook, and a raccoon runs out. I called Tracy. Tracy, are you okay? Tracy said, yes, a raccoon scared me. Chris laughed. I noticed it got very, very quiet. Not a sound. You couldn't even hear the crickets. I hear the tree gimp. Chris screams, and his eyes get big, and he starts shaking. Chris sees something in the distance, standing next to a tree. Then it jumped up about 50 feet into the tree. Chris remembered what Claire said about them hunting in pairs. He started to look around everywhere for the second one. Chris called us over. Tracy, Stanley, come quick. I saw something. Tracy and I ran over to Chris. Chris said, I noticed something standing next to the tree over there. It looked about 7 feet tall, and its eyes was glowing. Then it jumped straight up into the huge tree. Chris said, should we go over there? Tracy said, we should wait here and keep an eye on the tree. I said, yep, we have to keep a lookout all around us for the second one. We heard it again. It appeared peeping from behind the tree, and it stood there and stared at us. Then it slowly went back behind the tree. It sounds even closer now. Chris started pointing at something behind me. Oh, it appeared again. But it was peeking from behind a closer tree this time. We started looking around for the other one, so it didn't sneak up on us. Now we were getting very nervous. It was still staring at us. It slowly ducked back behind the tree. It's coming from behind an even closer tree. It's getting closer and closer. I asked Tracy and Chris, do you see the other one? This one is getting too close. The other one came up from a hole next to the boulder near Tracy. Chris ran towards the truck. I said, Chris, come back. Tracy started to cast a spell on both of them, but one chased Chris. Tracy went ahead with her spell. Tracy said, from the book of the sleeper, Abucha, Belhim, Nima, Bave, Nia. And it froze in time. Chris was still being chased. Help me! Then the tree gimp jumped up into the trees. Chris came over. Chris said, it almost got me. I said, you shouldn't have ran. It was playing with you. Remember, it could run up to 60 miles per hour. Chris said, oh, I forgot about that. I said, it will probably come back since we have its mate. Chris said, I see Tracy caught the other one. Tracy said, no thanks to you. So we hid on the other side of the abandoned house to see if it would return for its mate. We heard something moving near us. We looked around fearfully. Another raccoon came out of the bushes behind us. There's that sound again. It rose up from behind the boulder, and it stood next to its mate. Tracy started the spell. From the Book of the Sleeper. It jumped into the trees before Tracy could cast her spell. Now it could be anywhere in the trees. We heard this clicking sound over by the boulder, next to the frozen tree gimp. An owl flies out of a tree next to us and over our head. The tree gimp is standing right next to us. Chris ran, and Tracy locked in on the tree gimp and started her spell. From the Book of the Sleeper. Abucha, Belhim, Nima, Bave, Nia. And the tree gimp froze.
In the dimly lit Gray District Agency office, the investigators Stanley, Tracy, and Chris gather around the office desk, their eyes fixed on a dossier detailing a gruesome case of loss of lives. A malicious beast born from nightmares savagely unalived two unsuspecting men during a treacherous hunting expedition deep within the heart of the Minnesota's North Woods. Witnesses whispered a creature with antler-like horns, his eyes burning like sulphurous flames, and his grotesque claws thirsting for more flesh, standing at an unnatural height of 7 feet tall. Stanley asked Claire,
Claire, can you narrow down what this could be using the case files?
According to the Gray District Agency's database, there's a 95% chance that it's a Wendigo. A Wendigo is a beast-like humanoid creature that possesses people when they give in to taboo practices, like greed, excess, and particularly cannibalism. While scholars believe that the Wendigo began with the first humans. Wendigos are said to be cursed to wander the land, eternally seeking to fulfill their voracious appetite for human flesh. The creature is said to have several powers, such as the Wendigo's senses of sight, smell, and hearing are greatly enhanced, comparable to those of many predatory animals. The Wendigo can see clearly in total darkness. As the Wendigo grows older, its powers over nature increase exponentially. Wendigos are incredibly strong, even by monster terms. They can tear humans limb from limb, snap necks and carry two people at once, and even drag them up a tree with ease. They are considered to be among the strongest of creatures. Also, they have the power of immortality. Wendigos can heal rapidly from any wound that is not caused by fire or a magical weapon containing silver.
An unsettling silence settles in the room as the agents exchange weary glances, knowing that they are facing a malevolent entity born from the darkest aspects of human nature. It causes the agents to become very nervous. Stanley said,
We have some silver-tip arrows. Tracy, can you conjure up a spell for the arrows so they can only weaken the Wendigo?
Tracy replied.
Yes, I could do that.
Stanley explained.
Once it's weakened, I will have a chance to contain it. Let's grab the bow and silver-tip arrows and head into the North Woods.
Tracy went to go cast her spell. Chris said,
Why the arrows and not the fire?
Stanley replied.
The arrows are more stealthy and not so hazardous.
Tracy came back and asked Chris,
Chris, are you coming? If we don't stop this Wendigo, who will?
Chris replied.
Okay, I'm in. But just so you know, I'm scared out of my mind.
Please subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. The agents armed themselves with bows and silver-tip arrows. They set out into the frigid, snow-covered wilderness. Stanley said.
This is where it was last seen.
Chris said.
It's freezing out here. We forgot to bring out warm clothes.
The force seems to tighten around them. Evil hangs heavy in the air, igniting a primal fear deep within their souls. Chris screamed. They hear something large running through the snow. Tracy said.
Chris, it's just a deer.
Chris asked.
Are we sure about this? I mean, this Wendigo is like huge and wicked. And to top it off, it eats people.
The atmosphere thickens as the group continues into the forest. The moon is sitting behind dark clouds, casting eerie shadows across the dense trees. Stanley replied to Chris.
Chris, we could do this. We're members of the Gray District Agency.
Chris replied.
You're right. Let's do this.
The agents pressed on. Suddenly, Stanley crouches down, examining a set of strange footprints. Stanley said,
Look at these footprints. They're huge and oddly shaped. I'm not sure what animal left these.
Chris mentioned.
I used to track and hunt with my uncle, and I don't know what those prints come from.
Tracy said,
We must be close. Keep your head on a swivel. The Wendigo is probably watching us right now. Come on, let's go.
The agents proceeded on. Chris said,
Did y'all hear that? There's something moving over there.
Stanley whispered.
Be quiet, Chris. We don't want to scare it off. Y'all stay ready.
The forest is alive with tension. Each eerie sound causes them to get nervous. They spotted a glimpse of a massive, hairy figure moving through the trees. Tracy said,
That's the Wendigo.
The forest seems to hold its breath as the trio watches in horror. Stanley whispered,
Take a shot now.
The agents missed, and the Wendigo ran off. Chris said,
It's not as scary as I thought it was.
Stanley mentioned.
It's only because it was far away from us. You couldn't really see its flesh-thirsty fangs and ferocious eyes and large claws.
Chris looks worried. Tracy said,
Stanley, are you trying to scare Chris?
Stanley answered,
I'm just messing with him. But we are going to have to get closer to make the shot without getting eaten.
The team went further into the forest. Chris screamed. A deer ran between the trees. Stanley said,
Chris, calm down. It's just another deer. Let's keep going. There's a clearing just ahead of us.
The agents stumbled upon a clearing. The moon hung in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the landscape of jagged rocks. Stanley said,
Look, there's a cave over there. It must be living in that cave. What is that?
Tracy said,
I think you're right, Stanley. That scream came out of that cave.
In an instant, the Wendigo is standing at the mouth of the cave, but he doesn't see the GDA agents. Chris is so scared, he wets his pants. And the Wendigo went back into the cave. Stanley asked Chris.
Dang, Chris. It scared you that bad?
Chris replied.
Yeah, that's so embarrassing. And I didn't bring another pair of pants. Now I'm really gonna freeze.
Tracy said.
We're family, Chris. We're not gonna tell anyone. But you're still gonna freeze.
Stanley asked Chris.
Chris, go over there and draw it out of the cave.
Chris said.
Man, what? That's crazy. I'm not going over there.
Stanley replied.
Chris, don't worry. We will protect you.
Chris said.
What if you miss? Then what?
Stanley answered.
If we miss, we will light as many arrows as possible, and the fire will scare it away.
Chris said.
If it comes down to that, y'all better light this whole forest on fire to stop that thing from eating me. All right, I'm gonna go do it.
Chris walked near to the cave. He mumbled to himself.
Man, why I always have to be the bait? Anyways, what am I supposed to do to get this thing to come out of the cave?
Chris stood there looking at the cave. Chris said,
Hello? Hello? Man, this is so jacked up.
They came running out of the cave, straight for Chris. It was then that Tracy and Stanley, brave yet scared, raised their bows and aimed their arrows at the creature. The tension hanging heavy in the air as the agents focused on the Wendigo. Tracy and Stanley fired upon it. It's a direct hit. The Wendigo fell to the ground. Chris came back. Chris said,
I'm not doing nothing like that again.
The GDA containment unit retrieved the Wendigo and transferred it to an unknown location called the Gray Area. Stanley, Tracy, and Chris, investigators of the Gray District Agency. They're tasked with capturing a sinister animatronic known as Freddy Bear, lurking within the abandoned Freddy Bear's pizzeria. Reports showed that an animatronic caused the demise of people wandering into the abandoned pizzeria. At the GDA's office, Tracy couldn't help but research the history of Freddy Bear's pizzeria, hoping to uncover the secrets that bounds him to the place. She asked Claire, the GDA's AI.
Claire, what is the backstory of Freddy Bear at the Freddy Bear's pizzeria?
Freddy, an animatronic bear and beloved children's entertainer, resides at Freddy Bear's Pizzeria. He proudly serves as the cherished mascot of the original Freddy Bear's Pizza franchise, captivating audiences with his singing talent as he commands the center stage. However, unbeknownst to most, Freddy's existence is marred by a haunting past. He is tormented by the vengeful spirits of children who met a tragic end at the hands of a man named William Afton within the pizzeria. These innocent souls now linger within Freddy, compelling him to seek retribution against their assailant by unleashing his blind rage upon any adults who dare enter the pizzeria after closing hours.
They arrived at the decrepit Freddy Bear's pizzeria, shrouded in darkness and decay. They cautiously entered the abandoned restaurant. Tracy whispered.
This place feels cursed.
Chris replied.
Everything about this place is creepy.
Oh no!
The team hears a distant scream for help. Stanley said.
Sounds like that scream came from just ahead of us.
Tracy asked.
Hello? We're here to help. Where are you?
They discover a gruesome scene on the floor. Chris said.
Look, tomato sauce is on the floor.
Tracy sighed.
I don't think that's tomato sauce.
Stanley, Tracy, and Chris' mouth hung open in horror, staring at the red substance on the floor. Stanley implied.
Maybe the red body fluids came from the voice we heard screaming. Come on, let's keep looking.
They ventured deeper into the haunted pizzeria, encountering eerie sounds. They cautiously scanned their surroundings, never knowing what might try to get them. Tracy asked.
Chris, do you see anything?
Chris is frozen in fear. He didn't say anything. Tracy and Stanley turned around and saw Chris just standing there, his eyes filled with horror. Stanley asked Chris.
What are you doing, Chris?
Chris whispered.
Look over there.
They spotted a shadowy figure. Stanley whispered.
What is that?
Tracy answered.
I see something, but I'm not sure what I see.
Stanley said.
Let's get a little closer.
They proceeded to walk closer. Stanley said,
It's Freddy!
Fear grips them as they screamed and turned and ran. Freddy in hot pursuit, his malevolent, distorted laughter echoing through the pizzeria. Chris shouted,
We can't let it catch us!
Stanley and Tracy ran by Chris. Chris yelled,
Stanley, Tracy, wait for me!
They raced through the darkened pizzeria until they stumbled upon a small security control room with CCTV monitors showing rooms and hallways in the pizzeria. The room has 2 doors, one on one side and one on the other. Stanley said,
We need to find a way to capture him before someone else get hurt.
The team started thinking of ideas to capture Freddy. Suddenly they'd seen Freddy on one of the monitors. Freddy is staring right into the camera. Freddy uttered,
I've been waiting for you.
Freddy Bear's deep, menacing growl caused fear in their hearts. Freddy yelled,
You can't escape me!
Freddy moved away from the camera. Chris said,
I can't think of anything on how to catch him.
Freddy is standing in the doorway, and Stanley quickly pressed the red button that said close.
No.
The door closed. In desperation, Stanley spotted a series of rusted chains hanging from the ceiling. Stanley said,
I can use the chains to tie up Freddy. Tracy, do you think you could cast a spell to hold him long enough for me to put the chains on him?
Tracy said.
Yes, I could do it.
She performed the spell.
Petromortem evixis.
Tracy has Freddy contained. Chris opened the door. Stanley struggled to put the chains on Freddy as he tries to break free. With his adrenaline pumping, he managed to wrap the chains around the mechanical monster, restricting his movements. Freddy shouted,
You cannot contain me forever!
Chris is scared and shaking. Chris cried out.
Now what?
Tracy knew they only had moments before the animatronic broke free. Tracy shouted,
I'm going to send him straight to the GDA's containment unit, where he can't harm anyone.
She concentrated on her magic, conjuring a mystical portal right beneath his feet.
Bacta dispersion.
And the room fell silent. Stanley said,
We did it. We caught Freddy.
Freddy managed to break out of the chains and escape the portal. He ran off deep into the pizzeria with the ominous laughter echoing through the pizzeria as he disappeared into the shadows, shouting,
I will return.
Stanley yelled.
And we will catch you.
The agents were shocked that Freddy was able to escape. They decided to head back to the office until they figured out a way to capture him. 2 weeks later at the GDA's office, they found out that a demolition crew was attacked at the pizzeria and ended up in body bags. Tracy asked Claire, the GDA's AI,
Claire, what can we possibly do to catch Freddy?
It is said that there is a book of spells in the pizzeria that can control Freddy and remove him from the pizzeria. But the spell must be performed by a witch and a non-witch.
Stanley said,
We need to go back so we can find that book. I will perform the spell with you, Tracy.
Chris said,
Man, do we have to go back?
The team returned to the pizzeria on a stormy night. As they ventured deeper, the pizzeria seemed different, as if it had come more alive. Stanley led the way, guided by Tracy's magical senses, and Chris followed closely behind. They reached the control room where they had previously encountered Freddy. Freddy's voice echoed from the shadows. Freddy said,
I've been waiting for you. You shouldn't have returned.
Chris said,
I knew this was a bad idea to come back to this place.
Freddy is standing in the doorway. Freddy shouted.
You can't escape your fate.
Stanley spotted the spell book just in the nick of time. Stanley whispered.
This is the book.
As Freddy pressed closer, Tracy and Stanley frantically recited the incantations from the book.
Iti-yoko karate-yam. Iti-yoko karate-yam. Iti-yoko karate-yam. Iti-yoko karate-yam.
The room shook. Then Freddy convulsed. His voice distorted in agony. Chris ran off screaming. Stanley shouted,
It's working! Keep going!
Tracy has control of Freddy's spirit. Tracy said,
Mirificus negotium.
Tracy sent his spirit to the GDA's containment unit. And Chris came back. Chris stuttered.
Did we catch him?
Tracy sucked her teeth, and she said,
We didn't catch anything. Stanley and I caught him.
As they leave the cursed place behind, they couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lay in wait, ready to be uncovered in the shadows of Freddy Bear's Pizzeria.
This is an episode of the Great District Agency on Storytime Flix.
One late night, Tracy was at the Great District Agency office. The shrill ring of a telephone cut through the silence in the office. Startled, she hastily picked up the receiver,
Hello?
her heart pounding with anticipation. A trembling voice reached her ears that belongs to a young girl named Lauren. Lauren cried out,
Help! You won't believe what's happening. It's Amanda. She's after me.
Tracy's eyes widened. Lauren said,
Amanda killed my cat. And after that, things started getting strange. I saw a talking sheep, and the sheep told Amanda she was wrong for doing that.
Tracy's grip on the phone tightened up. How could such a thing be possible? She had heard of strange occurrences before, but never something as bizarre as a talking sheep. She then mustered up the courage to ask,
Lauren, are you safe?
Lauren's voice wavered, heavy with fear.
Help! Amanda is after me.
The line went dead. Tracy's heart raced, her mind in turmoil. She had to do something, and fast. Tracy called the cops. The next day at the office, Tracy told Chris and Stanley about what happened. Chris said,
The cops should be able to handle it.
Stanley said,
I don't know about that. They would freak the heck out when they see a talking sheep.
Tracy couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. With a determined glint in her eyes, she contacted the police, seeking answers about Lauren's well-being. Anxiety gnawed at her as she listened to the officer on the other end of the line. The officer said,
We questioned Amanda, but we didn't find anything strange. Lauren seems to have vanished without a trace, though.
Tracy's heart sank in disbelief, mingling with fear. How could this be? Was it possible that Amanda had hidden her sinister intentions from the authorities? Stanley's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts.
We should check it out, Tracy, especially since Lauren mentioned a talking sheep.
A shiver ran down Tracy's spine as she considered his words. Tracy said,
Okay, let's go.
Chris said,
Dang, here we go again.
the agents arrived at the farm. Stanley said,
It looks like their farm is also a petting zoo.
Tracy said,
Ew, I smell something awful.
Chris said,
It's a farm, Tracy. It's gonna stink.
Tracy said,
I know it's a farm, but I'm smelling something rotting like a body.
Stanley said.
Yeah, I smell it too.
They walked further across the farm. Stanley said,
The smell is getting stronger. Look over there. There's a mound of dirt.
Tracy said,
Oh, my. It smells horrible over here.
Chris said,
Look, something is sticking out of the dirt mound, with flies buzzing all around it.
Stanley said,
It looks like it's a dead cat, rotting away.
Tracy, Stanley, and Chris stood frozen, their eyes locked on the ominous dirt mound. The silence in the air was suffocating, as their imaginations ran wild with terrifying possibilities. Is Lauren, the missing person, buried beneath that mound of earth? Their eyes widened in terror. Stanley with a quiver in his voice and his trembling finger pointing at the mound. Stanley said,
Chris, dig through the mound, and Tracy and I will head over to the house.
Chris stuttered.
But what if I uncover Lauren's lifeless body in there?
His body trembled as he fought to steady himself. Stanley's voice turned grave as he replied, his words hang heavy in the air. Stanley said,
Chris, check this out. If you uncover the truth, you'll have unrevealed a fragment of this nightmarish puzzle. Once you're done, meet us at the house. Man.
Chris sucked his teeth in disappointment. Inside the kitchen, Amanda and Wooly are standing there. Then Amanda runs off just before the team walks in. Wooly is left there standing. Stanley said,
There's the sheep.
The sheep said,
Hi, my name is Wooly. You should not be here.
Wooly whispered, just as Chris walked into the room. Chris said,
What in the world? I see y'all found the talking sheep. By the way, there wasn't anything else in that dirt mound.
Hidden in a nearby room, you could hear Amanda saying,
By yell, by yell, by yell. By man, by man, by man. A lamb, a lamb, a lamb.
The lights went out. It was pitch black in the room. The lights came back on, and Wooly is gone, and Chris is nervously shaking. Tracy said,
Where did Wooly go?
Stanley said,
Yeah, I don't know.
Chris said,
Do you think that was Amanda's voice?
Tracy said,
Could be. I wonder if she grabbed Wooly.
Stanley said,
Tracy, Chris, did you notice the eyes on the fridge and the stove?
In a nervous voice, Tracy and Chris said,
Yes.
Stanley said,
Let's see if they could tell us something. Hey, fridge, stove, do you know where Amanda is?
The refrigerator letters started to move slowly. And it spelled attic. And the stove looked up towards the ceiling. There's a bump on the ceiling. Stanley said,
Let's find the attic door.
The agents climbed up the rickety ladder to the attic, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Stanley whispered,
Keep your guard up, everyone. We don't know what we're up against.
Tracy said,
Did anyone bring a flashlight?
Chris said,
No. Let me see if I can find a light switch.
Chris found the light switch, and the agents looked around. Stanley noticed something on the floor. Stanley said,
What's that on the floor? It's a VHS tape.
Tracy said,
Look, there's a TV with a VCR player built in.
Stanley pressed play, and Amanda appears on the screen. Amanda said,
Get out of my house right now!
The TV turned off. Chris said,
Guys, maybe we should listen.
Stanley said,
Normally we would, Chris.
Chris said,
I know. It's our job. We have to stay.
The TV turned back on, and Amanda was on the screen, and she started saying,
By Yale, by Yale, by Yale. Hi man, hi man, hi man. Ba-lam, ba-lam, ba-lam.
Stanley's eyes widened in disbelief. Stanley said,
Did she say a spell?
Tracy nodded, and her voice filled with determination. Tracy said,
It seems that Amanda has been dabbing in dark sorcery. I think this is what she was saying when Wooly disappeared. We need to put a stop to her madness right now.
Stanley said,
Did you hear that? It sounds like it came from the kitchen. It could be Amanda. Let's go to the kitchen.
An eerie silence enveloped the air. The agents cautiously entered the kitchen. Their senses heightened. They nervously glanced around, their eyes darting from one side of the room to the other. Stanley said,
Look, a lady is laying on the floor in a puddle of blood.
Tracy said,
Guys, she's not breathing.
Wooly walked into the room. Wooly said,
I told you, you should not be here. Wooly? 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 Where are you?
Amanda started calling for Wooly, and Wooly took off running. Stanley said,
Wait, Wooly, I have some questions.
Wooly kept running. Chris said,
Shouldn't we be running right behind him?
Stanley said,
Believe me, Chris, my instincts are telling me to run too. But we can't. We need to find out what's going on.
Amanda walks in with a knife in her hand, and Chris starts shaking. Amanda said,
Why are you still in my house?
Chris said,
What did you do with Lauren?
Amanda said,
That's not answering my question. Didn't I tell you to get out of my house?
The lights went out.
Help!
The lights came back on. Amanda is gone. And Chris is gone.
No, not Chris!
They heard a thump over their heads. Stanley said,
Let's go up to the attic.
Stanley and Tracy finds Chris tied up to a post with tape on his mouth. Stanley takes the tape off of Chris' mouth and unties him. Chris said,
Amanda is behind you!
Amanda stood there with a devilish grin, still holding the knife. Tracy jumped into action to protect the crew. She started a binding spell. Tracy said,
Maleficus Negotium.
It didn't work. Amanda jumped down through the attic door. Stanley turned to Chris.
Chris, stay here and keep an eye on the attic. Tracy, check the kitchen, and I'll check outside on the farm.
Chris said,
Y'all hurry up and come back now. If you hear me hollering, you better come running.
Tracy is in the kitchen. She noticed the lady's body is missing. Tracy asked the refrigerator and the oven.
Have you seen Amanda or Wooly?
The letters began to move again. It said, no. Stanley is out on the farm. But he doesn't see anything. Chris is still in the attic shaking, but no sign of Amanda or Wooly. Stanley and Chris meet with Tracy in the kitchen. Stanley said,
We can't seem to find Wooly or Amanda.
Wooly walks in. his woolly form radiating warmth and innocence. He approached the team with a sheepish voice. Willie spoke.
Amanda got lost in her own darkness, but she didn't mean to cause harm. We can help her find redemption.
Amanda's laughter echoed. She's somewhere in the house. Amanda said,
You're too late. Lauren is long gone, and you'll never find her.
Willie runs out of the kitchen. Tracy's eyes blaze with determination. Tracy said,
We won't let you get away with your wicked schemes, Amanda.
Stanley stepped forward with his firm voice.
Amanda, your reign of darkness ends now. Release Lauren and face the consequences.
Chris said,
Yeah, what they said. How are we going to catch her?
Stanley said.
I have an idea.
Stanley asked the refrigerator.
How are you alive? Did Amanda create you?
The letters began to move on the refrigerator. It spelled yes. Stanley said,
I know what we can do. We could catch her with the help of the refrigerator and oven.
Tracy said.
How?
Stanley said.
We could push her food to the back of the fridge, where she would have to lean in, and the fridge would do the rest by closing its door and locking her in. And the oven will alert us with its timer. She won't be able to get out because the fridge has the same magical power she has.
Tracy said.
I will set up the fridge.
Stanley said.
Okay, Chris and myself will head up to the attic and listen for the oven to set off its timer. Come up when you're finished.
Tracy said.
Okay.
Stanley and Chris are in the attic. Then Tracy walked in. Tracy said,
It's done. All we have to do is wait for the timer to go off. What? The timer just went off!
The team quickly runs back to the kitchen. They did it. They caught Amanda. The refrigerator is jumping up and down as Amanda is trying to get out. Amanda said,
Let me out of here! I'm going to kill you all!
Amanda was transported to the GDA containment site. Lauren was later found unharmed, and Willie was nowhere to be found.
No, not Chris!
The entity came from around the corner and grabbed Chris.
Deep within the bowels of the Burcrum County building lies a terror beyond imagining. It is said that an entity, or perhaps a group of creatures, lurks in the dark corners of the back rooms, waiting to prey on unsuspecting victims who wander too close. One entity in particular is made of something far more sinister than flesh and bone. The creature seems to come to life from a black substance resembling mold around the back rooms. A man died from an unknown blood infection while working in the back rooms. The black substance started to cover his deceased remains and mixed with his blood. This extremely hostile entity feeds on humans that dare cross its path. Async research that studied this entity had called the Great District Agency to capture it. Unsure of what they're up against, Stanley, Tracy, and Chris, three of the agency's top investigators, have been dispatched to the Burcrum County building to confront this abomination head-on. Stanley, Tracy, and Chris arrived at the Burcrum County building suited up in their hazmat suits.
Tracy said, This place gives off really bad vibes. I said, Let's start looking around and be careful of any mold-like substance we may come across.
Help me!
Our hearts stopped at a sound of a child's voice piercing through the eerie silence, beckoning for help from a distance. The chilling cry echoed through the darkness, sending shivers down our spines as we strained to locate the source of the desperate plea.
Help me!
But the voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once, surrounding us in an otherworldly presence. Fear consumed us as we realized that something sinister lurked in the shadows, luring us towards its grasp with the innocent voice of a child. Our minds raced with the terrifying possibilities of what awaited us. But we knew that we had to push through the fear and find the source of the chilling call for help.
Help me!
I said,
Someone needs help. What direction did it come from?
Tracy said,
It echoed off the walls. There's no way to tell where it came from.
Chris said,
Look, a human head!
Tracy screamed, and Chris began to shake with a horrified look on his face. I said,
I wonder where's the rest of the body. Come on, let's keep looking for this kid.
We delved deeper into the twisting corridors of the back rooms. You can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, and they often flicker on and off.
Help me!
We heard the child again.
Help me!
Tracy said,
The cries for help is coming from just ahead of us.
Help me!
We kept walking as someone saying help me gets louder and louder.
Help me! Help me!
We see a boy standing there, terrorized, looking at us, saying help me.
Help me! Help me!
A spine-chilling sensation crept up our backs as we heard a faint rustling behind us. We whipped around, hearts pounding, but there was nothing there. We turned back around, our eyes widened in horror as we realized the young boy we had seen was nowhere in sight. Suddenly, Chris began to tremble uncontrollably. His teeth started chattering in fear. Chris said,
Where did he go?
Tracy said,
I don't know. He was just standing there. He just disappeared. There is nowhere he could have went that fast.
I asked Claire, the GDA AI.
Claire, can you give me some information about the Bergcrum building? Specifically the cries for help in the back rooms.
Claire said,
Visitors of the Bergcrum building that wander into the back rooms often see and hear strange things, especially children crying for help that is not actually there. The cries are used to lure the unsuspecting visitor closer to getting massacred by the entity.
We heard a noise of its malevolent presence lurking just out of our sight, and we realized we may have bitten off more than we can chew. I said,
It feels like we're being watched and followed. The noises are getting closer and closer, coming from all directions.
We began looking all around so nothing sneaks up on us. Chris turned around facing the opposite direction from where we are heading and started walking backwards, keeping up with us.
As they moved further into the labyrinth depths of the Bergcrum building, they began to realize that they may not make it out alive. The creature is getting smarter with every passing moment.
Chris said,
Let's call it a day. Until Async Research, we didn't find anything.
Tracy said,
Chris, are you trying to get us fired?
Chris said,
No, I'm just trying to stay alive.
Tracy said,
Chris, you know what we signed up for. Let's get to work.
We heard a noise that startled us, and we didn't know where it was coming from.
Will Stanley, Tracy, and Chris be able to find and capture the creature and put an end to its reign of killings? Or will they become its next victims, trapped forever in the twisted, nightmarish world of the back rooms?
I said,
I hope we don't get lost in this place.
Suddenly something ran by the doorway. I said,
Did y'all see that?
Tracy said,
I saw something. I'm not sure what it was.
Chris said,
Yeah, I saw it too.
I said,
You know what we have to do? Let's go take a look.
We walked through the doorway that leads to another section of the building, which looks identical to the area we just left. We stood there and looked in both directions. We see something at the end of the room, peeking around a corner and staring at us. At least we think it is. It doesn't have any eyes. Chris said,
Well, let's go check it out.
It emerged from around the corner of the doorway and screamed right where we were standing. We turned around and ran for our lives. It chased after us. It was screaming and we were screaming. We ran and ran. It finally stopped chasing us, and we made it back to the doorway of the back rooms. I asked Tracy and Chris,
Do y'all have any ideas on catching this thing?
Chris said,
All three of us can jump it and hold it down and tie it up.
No, not Chris!
The entity came from around the corner and grabbed Chris. I went to help Chris. It hit me in the chest, and I went flying backward, and it ran off with Chris screaming. I said,
That thing is strong.
Tracy said,
We can't jump that thing.
I said,
We need to go find Chris.
Tracy and I went looking for Chris. We found Chris in the corner crying. Tracy asked Chris.
Are you okay? How did you get away?
Chris said,
I'm okay. I was able to break loose from his grip, and I ran as fast as I could, turning corners so fast, I got lost in this darn place.
I said,
Get up, Chris. We can't jump that creature. It's too strong.
Tracy said,
I can contain it by levitating it up into the air with one of my spells and holding it long enough for the Great District Agency's containment unit to arrive.
Chris said,
I really hope this works.
Tracy said,
It might.
Chris said,
Huh? It might?
Tracy said,
It's not guaranteed to work on this entity.
I said,
Okay, but let's wait for it to find us this time.
Help me!
The cries for help began again.
Help me!
Chris said,
It must be nearby.
I said,
Tracy, are you ready?
Tracy said,
Don't worry, I got this.
The creature came from around the corner, running straight towards us, screaming. Tracy said,
Y'all stand back.
Tracy locked in on the creature. Tracy said,
Maleficus Negotium.
Tracy has the entity levitated in midair. It's screaming and flailing its arms and legs uncontrollably. Tracy struggled to maintain control. The entity began to break free from her grip, descending ominously back towards the ground. But Tracy was not ready to give up so easily. With all her strength, she uttered another spell. The entity was thrust back into the air, struggling to break free. It was a terrifying battle for control, but in the end, Tracy emerged victoriously, the entity once again under her command. Tracy, Chris, and I breathed a sigh of relief. We had faced our fears and triumphed over the terror that lurked in the back rooms. The creature we had captured may have been defeated, but there are surely others in the back rooms, waiting to prey on unsuspecting victims. We knew that our work was never truly done, and that we would always be fighting against the darkness that lurks in this world.
Help me!
An assignment came from the Great District Agency headquarters about Gator Creek High School students. A teacher named Mrs. Maccabee reported that apparently when students went into the restroom during class, they were seen acting like mindless zombies, making weird sounds, roaming the hallways, and can't remember where their classrooms were. But when the bell rings for the end of the day, they start acting normal again. Yeah, I know, it sounds like a typical day at school. We went to the school while our after-school class was in session at approximately 7 p.m. Tracy was walking around the outside of the school. Chris went to the restroom, and I walked down the school's hallways looking for the witness, Mrs. Maccabee. I noticed the janitor walking by. I said, "Hey," and I tried to ask him a question, but he kept walking. Then I saw two students who had just come out of the restrooms. The female student walked like a zombie, and the male student crawled like a zombie. I tried to talk to them, but the students went past me like I wasn't there, and I swear they just growled at me. Mrs. Maccabee came over and said, "Did you see the students?" She said, "It only happens during class, not in between classes or when classes are out." I turned around to see where the students went, but they were gone. Then I was going to ask Mrs. Maccabee some questions, but when I looked around, she was gone too. I said, geez, can this get any weirder? Chris came out the same restroom as the male student did. I asked Chris whether he saw the kid in the restroom. Chris said no. Tracy came over, and I told him what had happened. Then I went into the men's restroom to look. I said, hello, is anyone in here? Hello? I didn't hear anything. Then I looked in each stall. And Tracy was doing the same thing in the women's restroom. Chris was walking the hallways, and he saw the janitor. Chris asked the janitor whether he had seen the kids acting strange lately. The janitor didn't say a word and kept walking. Then Chris came across a school locker that looked slightly different from the others. He tried to open it, and the locker opened.
Oh my God!
Chris screamed. A human head was in it. Chris ran into the restroom where I was. He said, I found a human head in one of the lockers. I said, what? Are you serious? A human head? Show me. I followed Chris to the locker. And Tracy came over and stood behind us. We didn't know she was there. I opened the locker. Tracy screamed. Then we screamed because Tracy screamed. Chris said, geez, Tracy, don't do that. You almost gave us a heart attack. Tracy said, sorry. But that head in the locker scared me. I said, I understand. We didn't know you were standing behind us, or I would have warned you about what you were about to see. Tracy said, while I was in a ladies' restroom, something strange happened. I started to feel lightheaded, like I was going to faint. Chris said, you sure it wasn't the smell? Tracy made a fake laugh. Ha, ha. Follow me, I'll show you. I asked Chris to close the locker. We followed Tracy to the restroom. Tracy went in first to see if anyone was there. Tracy called out and said, the coast is clear. So Chris and I went in. We felt dizzy, then quickly exited the restroom. Once we made it into the hallway, we felt fine again. I said to Tracy and Chris, I will go into the men's restroom to see if it happens in there this time. I entered the men's restroom. Within seconds, I felt dizzy. I went back into the hallway, and I said, yep, something strange was going on in both restrooms. Mrs. Maccabee came over. I asked her, when the students acted like zombies, do it only happen when they go to these restrooms? Mrs. Maccabee said yes. It only occurs in this area. Mrs. Maccabee left, and then I said, that's good. We only need to focus on this area instead of the entire school. Tracy said, okay. We have the restroom issue, the head in the locker, and the students turning into zombies. We need to search the GDA database for this one. Chris said I'll go to the mobile lab to search the new AI database. I told Chris to take the head with him to test it. Chris started shaking and said, what, the head? I said, yep. Chris said, okay, but I'm not going to like this. I said to Tracy, this investigation is a bizarre one. I'm going to run a gas test in the restroom for different forms of gases. Maybe that's what's causing the problem. I went into the restroom. The test didn't read any signs of gases other than human gas, CO2, and oxygen. Then I started to feel lightheaded. So I went back into the hallway. Tracy said, you know, I think it could be a spell on the restroom that doesn't affect us the same way it does the students. But I'm not sure what role the head plays in this. Chris made it back from the mobile lab with the new Gray District Agency portable AI. The AI said,
I found a spell on the head, and a soul borrower created it. A soul borrower looks like a regular person with magic, but its magic is weak. It uses the souls to strengthen its magic. It will borrow souls until it reaches peak strength. The spell on the head collects energy from teenage humans close by, giving power to another magical spell placed on a room. The room then takes the souls of the teenagers when they enter, but then the soul borrower needs to be nearby to cast a spell to send the souls to a container. And then, the souls are kept only for a limited amount of time in containers, then, they are returned to the owners.
I said, that makes sense. The head powers the restroom and collects the souls. Then the students come out like zombies. We need to find the containers the souls are stored in, so we could catch the soul borrower before it gets too powerful. Tracy said, okay, let's find the containers. Tracy and Chris searched the classrooms. I went into the janitor's closet. It looks like an average janitor's closet to me. Then I noticed closed curtains in the back of the closet, which was odd to see in a closet. I opened the curtain. And there they are, the containers. I called Tracy and Chris. Tracy! Chris! I found the containers! It looks like there are 10 containers with bubbling liquid in them. Chris and Tracy entered the janitor's closet. Tracy said, wow, that's a lot of containers. I said, yep. Now we have to figure out how to catch the soul borrower. Chris asked, can we let the souls out of the containers? I said, we don't know if it would damage them. It's better to wait it out until it's time for them to return to their owners. Evidently, everyone has access to this room since it's unlocked. Chris said, we should go ahead and grab the janitor. I think he's the one that's taking the souls. I said, we don't know for sure since they don't lock the janitor's closet. We went back into the hallway. Chris put an out of order sign on the bathrooms, and we headed over to the locker that has the human head. I asked Tracy if it was possible to put a spell on Chris. Chris said, why me? I said, hear me out. Tracy, can you put a spell on Chris to trick the other spells into thinking that Chris is a teenager? Chris said, oh, we just going to use me as bait, huh? Tracy said, you're going to be okay. I know a spell that can do it and protect you at the same time. Then Tracy said, but. Chris looked worried when Tracy said, but. Chris started shaking. Tracy said, but your soul will have to leave your body. Chris's mouth and eyes opened wide. Then he said, okay, that might be cool. Tracy and I looked at each other and looked at Chris and thought it was weird that he said that. But I said, okay. Tracy said, are you ready for me to do the spell? Chris said yes. Tracy performed the spell that she had learned from the Book of the Sleepers. By the powers of the Sleepers, I call upon you to make Chris's soul appear 16 years old, to the spell that the soul borrower in the school cast. Protect Chris' soul and return his soul before the soul borrower sends it to one of the containers. Tracy gave me some magical dust and said blow this dust in the face of the soul borrower. It will paralyze it, so it can't leave. I asked Chris to go ahead into the restroom. We are running out of time. The class will be out soon. I will hide behind the curtain in the janitor's closet. Tracy stayed out in the hallway, looking for anyone suspicious hanging around outside the janitor's closet. Chris stood in the restroom, and he started feeling dizzy. Tracy saw the janitor's closet door open and close, but she didn't see anyone. I heard the door open and close. I peeped around the corner, and I saw Mrs. Maccabee. I was like, it can't be her. So I watched her quietly. Chris was still in the bathroom feeling dizzy. Then his soul left his body. Mrs. Maccabee was standing there with her hands in the air with her eyes closed, and I was standing right behind her. Then I actually saw Chris' soul floating through the air. I stood in shock for a few seconds, staring at Chris. Then I blew the dust into Mrs. Maccabee's face. Her arms fell to her sides, and she just stood there with only her eyes moving. Then I noticed Chris' soul went behind the curtain, and I thought that wasn't supposed to happen. I opened the curtain. I couldn't tell which container his soul entered. I called for Tracy. Tracy! Tracy came in. I told Tracy that I saw Chris's soul floating in the air, and then it went behind the curtain. Tracy said, "What? That wasn't supposed to happen. The spell didn't work. Chris's soul must be inside one of the containers." I asked Tracy, "What can we do about Chris's soul?" Chris walked in and said, "Hi guys, did it work?" Tracy and I looked at each other, thinking the same thing. He's not a zombie. I asked Chris, "How do you feel?" He said, "Fine." I said, "We thought that your soul went into one of the containers." Chris said, "I was floating around in the air, passing through walls, until I made it back to my body." I said, "I'm glad it worked out." Chris asked, "Why is Mrs. Maccabee standing here?" I said, "She is the soul borrower." Chris said, "Wow." Tracy asked, "How did Mrs. Maccabee get in here?" I was standing right outside and didn't see her enter this room. She must have used the invisible spell. I called for the removal team. Chris posted the Gray District Agency sign outside, warning people that this is now a gray district. How about you? Do you know of a gray district? Could you leave it in the comments below? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. I received a phone call from a guy named Daniel Michelson, who was working at a 7-Eleven in Florida around 1 a.m. He kept hearing noises in the store. Every time he heard something, he was always alone in the store. Lately, things kept falling off the shelves for no reason, and he noticed that he had to keep restocking the Funday chocolate bars every day, and no one had been buying them for about a month now. Then he said today, a male customer about 6'2" and approximately 200 pounds entered the store and asked for a Funday chocolate bar. Mr. Michelson told him it was on aisle 2. Hence, the customer went down aisle 2. Mr. Michelson said he could barely see down the aisle, but something green looking jumped off one of the shelves, and the customer screamed. Mr. Michelson ran over to help and couldn't believe his eyes. Whatever it was, it attacked and mutilated the customer. Mr. Michelson said it happened so fast it was a blur. Blood and body parts were everywhere as if the customer exploded, and all the Funday chocolate bars were also gone. Mr. Michelson said he didn't see the creature other than something small and green, so we really don't have a good description. Mr. Michelson told me that he's not sticking around. He said he left the keys outside under the garbage can for us. It made me think, what is small enough to fit on a shelf and capable of mutilating a 6'2" man, about 200 pounds, in less than a minute? We arrived at the store. We were looking around the store for any evidence of this creature. There has to be a reason why it's hanging around a 7-Eleven. Chris came over and said he found a bunch of candy bar wrappers in the corner. It could have just been some kid that ate it and threw it in the corner, though. But just in case, I sent Chris to the mobile lab to test it for any foreign DNA. The soda can fell off the checkout counter right where I was standing. I don't know what caused it to fall, and I went around to the other side to see if something was hiding behind the counter. Nothing back here. Then another can fell. Tracy walked over and stood on the other side of the counter, and she said she heard a soda can fall, but didn't see anything on her side. Meanwhile, Chris was in the mobile lab analyzing the candy wrappers. Chris heard something on the roof. He stood still, waiting to see if he heard it again. Then he heard it again. So Chris went outside. He climbed up the side of the truck to take a look. He saw 2 dents in the roof. He went back inside the lab. He noticed the test had finished. He was rushing to get out of there just in case whatever made that dent in the lab came back. So he sent the info to my phone, and he ran out of there. Back inside the store, Tracy said in the storage room, all the way in the back, she found a large open cardboard box with rags and more empty Fun Day candy bar wrappers, like someone was keeping a pet in the box. I called Mr. Michelson.
Hello?
I asked him, was anyone keeping a pet in the storage room? He said, no. I told him about the box in the storage room. He said, I don't know anything about that. Chris walked in. He told us that something was on the lab's roof, and it made dents in it. Also, he said the test had finished, and he sent the results to my phone. I looked at my phone, and the results told us it was a Tasmanian elf. A Tasmanian elf is a cunning supernatural creature. It usually eats small insects and animals smaller than it is. If you mess with its food, it will completely rip you apart. But its favorite food is chocolate, peanut butter, and Rice Krispie, the exact ingredients in the Fun Day bar. It can teleport up to 20 feet away. They are about 2 feet tall with large purple teeth, pointy ears, and green skin. Tracy said I'm going to another store up the street for some Fun Day bars to use it as bait. I'll leave it up to you and Chris to figure out how to catch it. Chris said, why can't we just kill it? I said, you know the Gray District Agency rules. We must catch it alive. It's too intelligent and fast to capture it with any physical traps. We would have to use the Book of the Sleepers. It's an ancient book of witch spells. Chris' eyes opened wide. He said, I'm going nowhere near that thing. I said, I thought you weren't scared of anything. Chris said, well, I don't think I'm capable of using it the right way. I said, don't worry. Tracy has been studying that book. Maybe Tracy would do it. Tracy came back with the Fun Day candy bars for bait. She heard us talking about the book, and without hesitation, she said, I'll do it. I said, okay. I asked Chris to get the book. He hesitated because of the sound he heard earlier when he was in the mobile lab. Tracy placed the candy in front of the checkout counter, giving us an excellent way to see it while hiding on the other side of the counter. Chris returned with the book. He gave it to Tracy. Tracy said we first must make sure it cannot leave the store. I know of a spell in this book that will keep the Tasmanian elf inside the store. Tracy looked for the spell in the book. Tracy said, I found it. I will need 4 rocks from outside, 1 from each side of the building. Chris said, I'll get them. Tracy then searches for a binding spell to capture the Tasmanian elf when it takes the bait. Tracy said, I found something that will work. Tracy had to put a spell on the candy, so when the elf touches the candy, it will not be able to teleport or move. Chris came back with the rocks. Tracy placed them in a circle on the checkout counter. Then Tracy performed the spell. To all the sleepers on this earth, I call upon you to seal this store from corner to corner and ceiling to floor, so that only the Tasmanian elf is bound and cannot leave until I allow it to do so. Then Tracy placed the candy bars in the middle of the rocks on the counter. Then she performed the binding spell on the candy. Sleepers, I call upon you to bind the Tasmanian elf where it can't go forward or it can't go back, but stay right where it stands when it touches the candy and only release it upon my command. We placed the rocks and candy bars on the floor in front of the counter as planned. Then we hid behind the counter. We watched the security camera monitor waiting for it to come. There it goes. The Tasmanian elf walked by the candy. Then it returned and stood next to the candy and stared at it. Then it ran off. So we waited a few more minutes to see if it would come back. It teleported right next to the candy bars on the floor and laughed. Then it teleported away. Tracy and Chris looked at me. We screamed. It was standing right behind us. We ran from behind the counter and hid in the storage room. We waited before we went back into the store. We opened the door to the storage room and peeked into the store. We can see the Funday bars on the floor. So we walked around to see if we could find the Tasmanian elf. We didn't see it. I told Tracy and Chris, the Tasmanian elf is too clever for us to leave the bait in the middle of the floor. I asked Chris to put the candy on the shelf where it usually goes, and we would try to catch it that way. So we hid in the storage room again and watched the store from the security camera monitor. We saw it walk past the aisle the Funday bars were on. Then we saw it peep around the corner of the aisle. Then it slowly backed away. We couldn't see it on the camera anymore. We watched the monitor. It teleported right in front of the candy bars. It grabs a candy bar and froze right where it was standing. I turned to Tracy and said, "That spell was perfect." Tracy said, "Thank you." I called for the removal team. Chris went outside to post the Gray District Agency sign, warning people that this is now a gray district. How about you? Do you know of a gray district? Could you leave it in the comments below? Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Do you know of a gray district? Leave it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. A monster was seen at an old abandoned mansion. A 43-year-old man named Jeffrey Logan said that he had just finished tending to his cows on his farm at 1:30 a.m. He was heading back to the barn when he heard his cows making a distress sound. He quickly turned around and pulled out his gun. As he was running over there, his cows ran past him, heading in the opposite direction, towards the barn. When he reached the area where the distress sound came from, he saw blood, guts, and cow fur on the ground. It was in between the abandoned mansion and his farm. He said he couldn't believe something had eaten one of his cows so fast. Mr. Logan said he looked towards the neighbor's yard and saw something that looked creepy standing underneath a tree. It has wings and stands about 8 feet tall with horns on its head. He said his shadowy shaped body looks very muscular. We arrived at the farm and went over to see where the attack occurred. It's gross seeing blood, guts, and cow fur on the ground. I said, let's look around for footprints or something. I'm heading over to the abandoned mansion to see the tree that Mr. Logan said he had noticed something standing underneath. When I made it over by the tree, I saw deep scratch marks on the tree, and I noticed that there were footprints near the tree, and they were enormous footprints. Both of my feet can fit inside one, and I wear a size 12. The footprints made a deep impression in the ground. It can easily weigh 500 pounds. Mr. Logan arrived over at the farm. He walked over to Tracy, and Tracy told Mr. Logan, "It's not safe for you to be here." He said, "I know. I forgot to tell you about the strange footprints by the barn." Tracy said, "Okay, but you should leave now." As Mr. Logan walked to his car, he and Tracy heard something huge flying over their heads. Tracy ducked, and Mr. Logan stood there and looked up. The man screamed as the beast grabbed him. Chris came running to try and grab Mr. Logan's feet before it flew away with him. However, he was too late. It flew away with Mr. Logan towards the mansion. I quickly ran over to see what all the commotion was about. Chris told me what had happened, and Tracy said she got a good look at it and said it was a gargoyle. Then Tracy said gargoyles are meat eaters. They hate bright lights, and they are known to protect the area where they live from meat-eating predators. They are nocturnal, and they turn into stone statues during the day. They absorb the sun's ultraviolet rays. The ultraviolet rays give them extraordinary strength, making them strong enough to lift a city bus filled with passengers. We went over to the abandoned mansion to look around. As we walked over, we noticed 2 gargoyle statues on the roof. Chris went to the opposite side of the property, and Tracy went to the backyard. I went over to the front door to see if I could get inside the mansion. The door wasn't locked. I went inside. Woo! There's a horrible smell. There's trash everywhere, and the stairs are in the center of the room, leading up to the second floor. Tracy and Chris scared me. They stood quietly where I couldn't see them. Chris said, "Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't mean to frighten you." I asked them whether they found anything. Tracy said no. I didn't find anything. And Chris said he went up on the roof and said he saw 2 gargoyle statues and a third place where one should be, but it's missing. We heard something moving on the other side of the room. Tracy said it sounds like it came from the garbage can next to the stairs. I went over to take a look. And before I reached there, the lid fell off the can, and a head rose up out of the can. It was Mr. Logan. Mr. Logan said it brought him into the house, and he got away from it, so he hid in the garbage can. I said, well, this must be where it lives or eat. We could wait until the sun comes up and see if it turns into stone on the roof. And before I could finish what I was saying, Mr. Logan said the missing statue on the rooftop had been gone for years. I said, really? It can turn into a statue anywhere. It looks like we will have to find a way to catch it tonight. Mr. Logan said, I'm out of here. Let me know when you catch that thing. Tracy screamed. It snuck up on us and grabbed Tracy and took her into one of the back rooms. Chris and I looked at each other and we were like, we need a weapon now. I was ready to run after her. Then I saw her running from room to room, and it was chasing her. I yelled to Tracy, run this way. I was ready to fight it. And just as I said that, Tracy came running out of one of the rooms, but I didn't see the gargoyle. She's shaking and scared. She said one of the lights in the back room works, and she was able to turn on one, and the gargoyle screamed and flew out the window. I asked Chris to go get the GDA net gun. It should be strong enough to hold it. I use it to shoot it out the air, but I only have one chance. If I miss it, I will need enough time to load it again. I looked at Tracy, and she said, I know. I'll go get the bait. I looked around for some good places to hide. With the bait Tracy brings back, I figured we could use it to draw it out in the center of the room. Chris made it back with the gun. Chris said we only have 2 net cartridges. Chris hands me the gun. Then Tracy came in with a horse as bait. We heard something upstairs. I said, let's hide. Tracy ducked down behind one recliner, and Chris hid behind another one. I climbed into the garbage can. We heard more noises coming from upstairs. We waited patiently. It appeared at the top of the stairs. Then it flew down from the top of the stairs, hovering over the horse. Okay, this is my chance. Let me catch him before he gets the horse.
I sprung into action and pulled the trigger.
I missed. I thought for sure it was coming straight for me. But the gun startled the horse, and it started running around the room, causing the gargoyle to go after it. That gave me a few seconds to load the gun again. I aimed and fired. I got it. I got it this time. It's now lying on the floor, tied up in the net, screaming. Oh no, it escaped from the net. It came towards us. I quickly opened the window, and the light from the sun flooded the room. The gargoyle turned into stone and fell to the ground. Woo! That was a close one. We finally caught it. Tracy called Mr. Logan to let him know that we had captured the gargoyle. I called the removal team. Chris went outside and posted a Gray District Agency sign, warning people that this is a gray district. How about you? Do you know of a gray district? Leave it in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. This is me, Stanley, standing outside the Gray District Agency office at night, looking at my phone. Ouch! A mosquito bit me on my arm. They are buzzing all around me. I decided to go for a walk in the nearby neighborhood, not too far from the Gray District Agency office. It's an average night out in the city. You can hear the city noise as usual. As I approached their house, I noticed a dark figure of a person standing in the front yard. I decided to be friendly. I said, hello. And he said, hello. He coughed. His voice sounded like mine. I walked closer to see if I could see the person clearly. The person also walked closer. I see myself standing in the yard, looking at me. You can imagine this freaked me out. I turned around and ran back to the office. It also turned around and ran in the opposite direction. I made it to the office. Tracy and Chris was there. I told them everything that had happened. Tracy said, wow. And Chris said, let me get this right. You saw yourself and you said hello? Chris laughed. I said, whatever, Chris. Tracy said, let us go take a look. I said, there's a lot of mosquitoes out tonight.
Ouch!
Chris got bitten by one. I said, come on, follow me this way. Tracy said, those mosquitoes were huge, and it seemed like they were only hanging out over by the office. Chris said, yeah, they hurt too. I said, I saw myself over there. Chris said, I don't see anyone. Tracy said, what's that over there? That must be the guy you saw, Stanley. Tracy, Chris, and I walked closer. The person also walked closer. We screamed. The person walked into the light. It's Chris, but not Chris. We ran back to the office. We made it back. I said, Chris, why you didn't say hello to yourself? Tracy laughed. Tracy said, it's hot in here. Chris said, they're working on the air conditioner. I said, we need to figure out what's happening. Why did I see myself? And why did we see another Chris? But we didn't see another Tracy. Chris said, maybe it's a guy thing. Tracy said, I'm going outside to get some air. Tracy is standing outside.
Ouch!
Tracy was bitten by a mosquito on her hand. Back in the office, I said, man, this mosquito bite itch. Chris asked, did one bite you too? I said, yep. Tracy walked in. Tracy said, there are too many mosquitoes out there. Chris said, Stanley and I were just talking about them. I asked, did one bite you? Tracy said, yes. I said, it also bit me and Chris. Let's go back and see if we can speak to me, Chris. You know what I'm trying to say. We went back. We reached where we saw the last one. We didn't see anything, so we waited. Then we saw a dark shadow coming from the side of the house. We walked closer. This one might come closer like before. As we walked closer, it walked closer. It's Tracy. Let me ask it some questions. What's your name? It said, Tracy. I asked, do you live here? She said, no. I asked, where do you work? She said, I work for the Gray District Agency. We looked at each other for a moment. Tracy said, we know everyone at the agency. We don't know you. Then it shook and screamed. It turned into a creature about 4 feet tall and ran off into the dark. We ran back to the office just in case it came back, since we didn't know what it was. Back in the office, I said, it looked like Tracy this time. I think it has something to do with those mosquito bites, because after I was bit, then my clone showed up, and the same thing happened to both of y'all. I asked Claire, hey, Claire.
Yes.
Check your database for a 4-foot tall creature. It was able to look like all three of us, even down to our clothing. And before we saw our clones, we were bitten by mosquitoes. Claire said,
it's a reptilian that eats mosquitoes and can replicate human beings from the DNA in the blood the mosquito drinks. It also can get the DNA directly from humans by biting them. If it bites you, you are guaranteed to die unless you take the antidote. That's if you survive the attack. It will also eat you to get the rest of its nourishment. It has a keen sense of smell and eyesight. Once it sees you and has your DNA inside its stomach, it can pick and choose whom to replicate and your clothes. It can only hold the replicated form for 15 minutes if it receives your DNA from one mosquito. Still, if it gets a large amount of your DNA, it can keep its shape for a more extended period until it completely digests the blood. Then it turns back to its original form. When it changes into a copy, it has a cough. When it's asked a question about the person, it replicates, and it can't answer the question, it's triggered and changes back to its original form. It can only be captured by stabbing it with a dagger made from the Three Kings Kaikamako tree from New Zealand.
I went to go get the dagger and the antidote. Tracy said, Chris, that was weird. She looked just like me. Chris said, yeah, it shocked me too when I saw myself. I wonder how we will get close enough to stab the reptilian with the dagger. Tracy said, how will we find it if it looks like someone? Chris said, why do you always ask me the hard questions? I don't know. Ask Stanley. Tracy laughed. I walked in. I said, it's hanging out in this area because of all the mosquitoes. With some luck, it will stay in this area for tonight. We'll have to get bit up by mosquitoes and hope it turns into one of us or remains in its original form. Tracy and Chris looked at each other, and you could tell they didn't want to get bit up by mosquitoes. We went out in front of the office building, waiting to get bitten. While we were waiting, a guy was walking towards us, coughing. Chris said, that's it right there. I said, we don't know that. I pulled out the dagger just in case. The guy walked on by. The mosquitoes started biting us.
Ouch! 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 Ouch!
We started walking
Ouch.
over towards the house. I sneezed. We waited. A dog came out of nowhere. Tracy and I took off running back towards the office. Chris stood there, and the dog went after Chris. Chris ran, and while he was running, his clone also ran, running right alongside of him. The dog's owner called it. "Sparky, come back here right now." They made it over by us, and the dog turned around and went to the owner. We were shocked. We needed to figure out what to do because we didn't know which one was the real Chris. I pulled out the dagger. Both Chris said, "Wait a minute. What are you getting ready to do?" I thought to myself, should I just guess and stab one? Nah, I can't do that. Tracy asked Chris, "Did Stanley cough when we were walking towards the house?" Chris said, "No, he sneezed." The other Chris started to change. And before I could stab it, it changed back into the creature. Then it went to bite Tracy, which was a mistake. I stabbed it in the head. It worked. The dagger didn't kill it, and it couldn't move. I asked Tracy, "Tracy, how did you know to ask that question about me coughing?" Tracy said, "It couldn't have known, since it happened after we were bitten by the mosquitoes."